We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Yud Chesam and Beis and Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 118b. And the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing the Mishnah in Shkolim. The Mishnah in Shkolim deals with a case of a person who's watching over the growth during the Shemitah year, meaning it was not intentionally planted, it was just growing on its own. And the idea was he's watching it, he's guarding it in order that they're going to use it to bring either the Omer or the Shtei HaLechem. And the Tanakam in that Mishnah says that you have to pay this person who's watching over it, but Rabbi Yossi says you don't have to pay the person who's watching over it. And we had a number of explanations on the previous summit how to understand the Mishnah, and the Gemara is now in the middle of the second version of Rava's understanding. In the second version of Rava's understanding, everybody agrees that Habata behefker, looking at hefker, is not going to be a kinyan. Now, if it's not going to be a kinyan, that would seem to be good in accordance with Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi says since it's not a kinyan, so the shomer chinam who's watching for free is not kona, and then when the community takes it, they will essentially be the owners, and the karbanos will be coming from the tzibor as they are supposed to. But the question is, if Habata behefker is not a kinyan, so why is the Tanakama machmir, so to speak? Why did the Tanakama say that we have to pay this person, and he can't be a shomer chinam? And the Gemara in the previous summit said, according to the Tanakama, the reason is because we are concerned of violent people. If we don't pay this person, if he's just a shomer chinam, then violent people might actually try to take what he is guarding. But if you pay him from the treasury of the Beis HaMikdash, the violent people are going to be scared off, essentially. And so the Gemara now continues, Uma ata omer. Now, what does it mean, ata omer? What is the Tanakama responding to Rabbi Yossi as if what Rabbi Yossi is saying is incorrect? This is what they're saying. Midvarecho lidvarenu, meaning according to you that the person is watching for free, according to us that there's a concern of violent individuals, ein boin mishel tzibur. So what's going to happen is it's not going to come from the community, and the idea is again the concern of these violent individuals. And Rashi explains, Uma ata omer. So what does ata omer mean? Einon boin mishel tzibur. What did the Tanakama, what are they arguing against Rabbi Yossi that they're saying, according to you, that we have a shomer chinam, it's not coming from the community? Ha'amrin delo kani, but we just said that everybody agrees that habata behefker is not a kinyan, so really it is coming from the community. What exactly do the violent individuals, what does that have to do with the idea that it's not coming mishel tzibur? And the Gemara answers to that, according to you that you're saying that the person watches for free, lidvarenu, and then according to us, because we hold that the Rabbanan say that the person does need to get paid. He needs to get paid 4 zuz from the Trumas Halishka. Again, the idea is because we're afraid of these violent individuals. Now, what's going to end up happening is vizem mochel alehen. This person is going to be mochel. He's going to say, well, I don't want it. I'm really entitled to 4 zuz, but I'm mochel. I don't need it. I'm doing it for free. So it's going to come out that in terms of the 4 zuz, that 4 zuz that he was supposed to be paid, so that Tzibur, the community, doesn't have a portion in that. Vim konin mehen tamidin musafin. So if they're going to use that money instead to buy carbon tamid, carbon musaf, ushar karbonos sibur, and other karbonos sibur, ain tamidin boin mishal tzibur. The way Rashi understands the Gemara, those karbonos, let's say those carbon tamids, those are not going to come from the community. In other words, what the argument of the Tanakama against Rabbi Yossi is, according to the second version of Rava, is that in general, if this person is a shomer chinam, then that money that was supposed to be paid to him is not going to be paid to him, but he's really entitled to that money. That money will no longer be communal, and then other karbonos are not going to become mishal tzibur. That's how Rashi understands what the Gemara is saying here. V'chein kiyasa Ravin amar Rabbi Yochanan, and similarly when Ravin came, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said, Choshishin lebalei zroos iga beinayu. The difference is, again, are we concerned for these violent individuals? And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hamotzi zevel Rishus Harabim. If somebody is taking out manure to the Rishus Harabim, Hamotzi motzi, the one who's bringing it out should bring it out. V'hamizavel mizavel, and the one who's using it as fertilizer needs to do so immediately. The point over here is you can't just leave it out in the Rishus Harabim. And similarly, ein shorin tit b'Rishus Harabim. You're not allowed to soak clay in the Rishus Harabim. Vein lovnim leveinim, and you're also not allowed to make bricks in the Rishus Harabim. Avol govlin tit b'Rishus Harabim, but you are allowed to knead the clay in Rishus Harabim. Avolo leveinim, but again, you can't do that with bricks. Habona b'Rishus Harabim. Let's say somebody's building something in the Rishus Harabim. Hamevi avon, and maybe the person bringing the stones brings it. V'habona bona, and the person building should immediately start building. V'im hizik mashalim mash hizik, and if it causes any damage, you have to pay what the damage was. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Af mesakin hu es malachdo lefnei shloshim yom. He's allowed to prepare the work that he's doing even for 30 days. That's not a problem to do these preparations in the Rishus Harabim for 30 days. And Rashi explains, hamotzi motzi v'hamizabel mizabel, the one taking out the manure takes it out, and the one using the manure has to use it immediately. Kolomar, what it means is as follows. Eino rashoy l'hasho sosham, the point is you can't let the manure just sit there. Elazem motzio min harefes l'rishas harabim, this person brings it out from his refes into the rishas harabim. V'hanoso yehe mizumin l'lisoenu l'sadu l'gina l'zavel, and the person carrying it needs to right away take it to wherever he's taking it for fertilizing. Ein shorin tit, you're not allowed to soak clay. Mekomos yesha shorno so yamim rabim tzaber b'makom echad. You have it all gathered in one place, and you soak it for many days, so that you're not allowed to do. Again, in the Rishus Harabim, ve'ein lovnim levenim, you also can't make these bricks. Lefisha mashos on liyavshan, the way they made the bricks is they left them out there to dry. Sheshoteach hatit bekarka chaloka ko'ove halevenim v'choret bo charitzos shasi ve'erev kemidas halevenim u'manichan sham ad sheyevoshu. They would put over there the clay and on the ground, and they would make grooves in the clay in the shape of the bricks, and they would lay the bricks there. So again, you can't keep those out there in the Rishus Harabim. However, v'govlin, you are allowed to knead the clay loses miyad bebinyan. The idea there is that you're going to use it immediately for the building. And then it said v'habona bona. Let's say you're building something, so you bring the stones and you immediately build. Mekabel miyad hamevi ubona, immediately. He takes it from the person who brings the stones and he starts building. But then Rav Shimon Gamliel said you can even do 30 days before. Misakein mizamin b'rishas harabim ve'eno chayav ben izaken. You can prepare things in the Rishas Harabim for 30 days, and you will not be chayav in the damages in that situation, according to Rav Shimon Gamliel. And we will note over here that some understand this Rashi, v'govlin tit, that you're allowed to knead the clay, losses miyad bebinyan, to put it immediately in the building. What Rashi means to say is you're allowed to knead the clay in order to put it immediately into a building, avol lo levein, but not in order to make bricks. Again, going back to the idea that you can't knead the clay for the purposes of the bricks, but you can do it for the purposes of the building. That is another way to understand Rashi. And we will note as well that according to that second understanding of Rashi, the gears of the Rif fits well. The gears of the Rif is avol lo lileveinim, not for the bricks. Again, that's going on the kneading of the clay. You can't knead the clay for the purpose of making bricks. And the Gemara says, Lema masnisin delok Reb Yehuda. Let's say that our mission is not like Reb Yehuda, the Tanya, as we learned in a Braisa. Reb Yehuda says, B'shas otzah zvalim, at the time of the taking out of the manure, Adam motzi zivlo l'Rishas Harabim, a person is allowed to take his manure out to the Rishas Harabim, v'tzovro kol shloshim yom, he can leave it there for 30 days, kadei she'enisha b'ragli adam u'v'ragli behema, so that it gets stepped upon by the feet of people and the feet of animals, and that prepares it as manure. Shal menas kein hinchel Yoshua li Yisrael es haaretz, because it was on that condition that Yehoshua gave the land to Klal Yisrael. And so you see over here that Rabbi Yehuda says he had permission to leave it out there, and that seems not like the Mishnah, which says immediately you have to remove it from the Rishas Harabim. And the Gemara says not necessarily afilu tema Rabbi Yehuda. You can even say that the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Mod Rabbi Yehuda shem hizachayiv l'shalim. Rabbi Yehuda is saying he had permission to bring it out, but still Rabbi Yehuda would admit that if it causes any damage, you have to pay, which is essentially what our Mishnah is saying. But the Gemara says v'atanan, but we learned in the Mishnah, Mod Rabbi Yehuda b'ner Chanukah, that Rabbi Yehuda admits by ner Chanukah, shehu potter, that he's potter. Let's say he takes the ner Chanukah out, it's a mitzvah to put out the ner Chanukah, so he says you're potter there from damages, because he had permission. And so you see, when you have permission, you don't have to pay according to Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara says, my love, doesn't it mean rishus de bezin? As long as you have permission from the court, then you're not responsible for damages. And the Gemara says, lo, no, rishus de mitzvah just means that if you have the rishus, you have permission because it's a mitzvah. That's true by ner Chanukah, but when it comes to the manure, you have rishus de bezin, but that does not mean that you are not responsible for damages. But the Gemara still asks, Vatanya, but then we learn in the Braisa, kol elu she'amru mutarin lekalkel b'rishus harabim. All of these cases where we say it's mutter to put something like this in Rishus Harabim, it's mutter essentially to ruin, so to speak, the Rishus Harabim. Im hizak chayev l'shalim, if damage is done, you do need to pay. For Rabbi Yehuda poter, but Rabbi Yehuda says poter. Rabbi Yehuda seems to be saying that any case you have permission, even if it's just the permission of the bezdin, you are going to be poter. And so the Gemara says, Ella rather machvarta masnisin delok Rabbi Yehuda. Go back to what we said originally. Our Mishnah really is not like Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda would say you're not responsible for the damages, and our Mishnah says you are responsible for the damages. And Rashi explains, Moda Rabbi Yehuda would admit, again, the Gemara initially said Rabbi Yehuda admits that you're chayiv in damages, umasnisin nami eitz tova kamar. So the Mishnah then is just giving you good advice to get it out of there, shelo yischayiv ben isko, so that you shouldn't be chayiv. But again, you would have permission according to that approach. Then the Gemara said, B'ner Chanukah potter, that Rabbi Yehuda says by by Ner Chanukah the person is potter. The storekeeper puts the candles outside. And it causes a fire over there. That's a case from Bava Kama. And so then the Gemara said, "My lab Rishus Bezdin," doesn't mean that as long as you have Rishus Bezdin, you are not responsible. Alma Kalmidi di Yohavule Rabbanan Rishusim Hizik Potter. You see that anytime the Rabbanan give Rishus, you're actually Potter. Then the Gemara said, no, maybe it only means Rishus the Mitzvah. But then the Gemara brought a brisa that showed no. Anytime you have Rishus Bezdin, Rabbi Yehuda says Potter, and that's this brisa Kol Elu Sha'amru Kol Osan Nizokin Shenasnu Chachamim Aleim Rishus. Anytime the Chacham gave Rishus for these kinds of things which cause damage, V'yamru Mutar Lekalkel Rishus Ram Ulashlichon Sham. They said you can ruin the Rishus Ram, so to speak, and put these things there. Kegon Hotzas Zavolim Rabbi Yehuda, like again taking out the manure according to Rabbi Yehuda. Uchegon Poskin Bevoseim V'Gorfen Mo Rosein B'Mos Hagashamim. There was also cases of letting the water out into the Rishus Rabim to Rishus Ka'avdi B'Bava Kama. The people had permission, like we said in Bava Kama. Again, this brisa says that Rabbi Yehuda says you're potter, and that's why the Gemara ends up saying that the Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel v'Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Shimon, Kulu Svira Lahu, they all hold, Kol Makom Shenasnu Lo Chachamim Rishus, that any time the Chachamim give permission for something, v'hizik, and then it causes damage, so Potter, the individual, is Potter. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda had the Amran, Rabbi Yehuda, what we said above, again, Rabbi Yehuda was talking both by Ner Chanukah and also by situation, Kol Elu Sha'amru Mutar Lekalkel B'Rishus Haravim. Rabbi Yehuda said Potter in those cases. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, we find it as follows, D'Tnan, because we learned in our Mishnah. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, Af Mesakin Hu Es Malachdo Lifnei Shloshim Yom. He's allowed to prepare his work for 30 days beforehand, and that means to say that he's not responsible. Rashi explains, Af Mesakin Hu V'Koya Tanakama. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is going on the Tanakama. The Yomar Im Hizik Meshalim, because the Tanakama is saying that if he does damage, he has to pay. V'Kamar Le'iu, and that's what Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is responding in our Mishnah and saying, Af V'Shloshim Yom Kodem Lachain Mesakin Upater. Even 30 days before, he can prepare the work he's going to be building, and he will be Potter. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Shimon, where do we see that Rabbi Shimon holds this T'tnan, as we learned in the Mishnah? This is a Mishnah in Bava Basra. Haya Ma'amido Ba'aliyah, this is talking about somebody who's putting an oven on the upper floor. Tzarach Sheyeh Tachtov Maziva, there has to be a plaster floor beneath it. Shalosha Tvachim, that is 3 Tvachim thick. That way it won't damage the person who's living underneath. Uvakira, let's say it's a stove, so then Tefach, then it needs to be just 1 Tefach thick. V'im Hizik Mashalim Mash Hizik, and if he does any damage, he has to pay the damage. Rabbi Shimon says, no, that's not true. Lo Amru Kol Ashirim Halolu Eloshim Hizik Pater Milashalim. The only reason they give all of these measurements is to say that if the person does damage, then he's exempt, as long as he took the proper precautions. And Rashi explains, if he's placing it in the upper floor, Mishnah hi Bava Basra. This is a Mishnah in Bava Basra, below Yachbor, and Perak Lo Yachbor. Lo Yamid Adam Tanur B'Soch Habayis. A person can't put an oven in a house. Ele Imkain Yesh Al Gab of Cholol Goved Al Ramos. There has to be above it a space of 4 amos, Mipi Hatanur Le'aliyah, from the opening of the oven to the upper floor. Let's say the other way around, Hayamamido Ba'aliyah, let's say he's putting it on the upper floor. Ad She'etachtov Ove Maziva Shlosha Tvachim, you have to have a plaster floor that is 3 Tvachim thick. Uvakira, and if it's a stove, She'ein Hesek Shabal Gadol, which is a smaller fire, so then Tefach Maziva, you just need 1 Tefach of plaster. Yehei Tachteh has to be underneath it. And finally, Rashi says, Vim Hizik, if it does damage, Shadala Kabayis V'hidlik Es Seviva, if it causes essentially a fire. So then again, there's a Machlokas Tanoim, and Rabbi Shimon says the person is exempt because he took the proper precautions. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the sages taught, Hachatzav Shemasar Lesatos, if the stone cutter gives it over to the chiseler, Hasatos Chayev, at that point the chiseler is Chayev, Hasatos Shemasar Lechamor, the chiseler gives it over to the donkey driver, Hachamor Chayev, then the donkey driver becomes responsible, Hachamor Shemasar Lekosef, if the donkey driver gives it over to the porter who's going to carry it, Hakosef Chayev, then the porter, the one carrying it, becomes Chayev, Hakosef Shemasar Lebanoi, if the porter gives it over to the builder, Habanoi Chayev, then the builder is chayiv. Habanoi shemosar la'adrichol, if the builder gives it over to the master builder, adrichol chayiv, then the master builder is chayiv. V'im hiniach even al hadimus v'hizika kulan chayav and l'shalim, if he places a stone on top of the upper row of what is being built and then it falls and it does damage, so then they're all chayiv to pay. The Gemara says, what do you mean they're all chayiv? But we learned in a brisa, achron chayiv, only the last one is chayiv. The kulan paturim, and everybody else is exempt. And the Gemara answers to that, Lokash, it's not difficult. Kan b'schiras, kan b'kablonis. In one case, we're talking about a hired worker, and in the other case, we're talking about a contractor. And Rashi explains, Chatzav hachotzev even min ahar la'akra michibura. This is the person who cuts the stone from the mountain. Satos is hu hamirabo machlika. That's the person who chisels the stone and makes it smooth. Chamor is nosa min ahar. The chamor is the person, the donkey driver, carries it from the mountain. Shesitza hasatos sham umoshal hakasef hamoshita lebanoi. Again, that's where they cut the stone out of the mountain, and then he's going to bring it with the donkey, and they bring it over to the kasef, the porter, who then brings it to the builder. Ha'omed al maimed hachum, who stands by the wall. That's where the craftsmen are walking. Adrichol, the adrichol is hu aviha, that is the master builder. Shumedaktek b'hanacha, so even litzdada al moshava b'shava. That's the person who's careful to place it down properly. Shelo tamish v'lo sata, so that it shouldn't move, it shouldn't lean. V'lo tebo letes chutz ladimos, and it shouldn't stick out of the row. So chayiv, so always the person who has it is the one that's chayiv in any damage that it does. Meaning to say, zeh shehi biyado chayiv b'niska. Whoever has possession at that time is the one that's chayiv in any damage that it does. Im tipol miyado v'tazik esachem. If it falls from his hand and damages others, otishaver he, or let's say if it breaks, hu chayiv l'shalom, then he's going to be chayiv to pay. Now Rashi says, even though later on we're going to say we're talking here about kablonis, and kablonis is where they're being paid for the job as a whole. V'kulan shutfin b'malach, they're all partners in this work. Ein chayiv elamisha haisa mesura lo. The person who has it, he's the one responsible at that time. Tekevan the kocho hu hanezek mutal olav. Since it's from his strength, the damage is his responsibility. Kol heichad demisrami, wherever it is. Ditnan, as we learned in the Mishnah, adam muad liolam, a person is always responsible. Shogeg umezid ones v'ratzon, doesn't matter by mistake or on purpose. Doesn't matter if it's an accident or willingly. Denafgalon b'Bava Kama, we learned that on Bava Kama. Petzatachas patza l'chayiv ala shogeg kemezid v'ones karatzon. We learn from the pasuk of Petzatachas patza that you're chayiv for mistakes, just like if you do it on purpose. You're chayiv for accidents, just like if it's willingly. Kulan elu shahayu shutfin b'malacha achas. Now it says like this: there are all of these people who are partners in this work. Umishehinicho even al hadimos, and when the stone is placed on that row of stones, hishuras habinyan, that's the row of the building, nafla v'hizika, then falls and damages. Hoel v'lav kocho da'adrichol. Now in this case, at the end of the brisa, it's not coming from the strength of the master builder, the damage. Shalachar shehinicha nafla. What actually happened is it fell after he already placed it. V'lekol l'chiyuve mishum giri delay. So it's not going to be he's not going to be obligated because it's his arrow. So then kulan chayav and yachad, then they're all responsible. Shakulan shutfin b'davar, because they're all doing the work together as partners. V'alein hamalacha lasos v'kiblu achrayas hanezek yachad. They're all doing the work together, and they've taken responsibility for the damage together. And so the Gemara says we have a contradictory brisa of Atanyo Achron Chayiv. There's another brisa that says the last person is Chayiv, Adrichol Sheinicha, meaning the master builder who placed it down is Chayiv. And the Gemara says it all depends. Beschiris, if we're talking about just a hired to do the work, so then Ha'achron Chayiv, then the last one is Chayiv. Meaning to say, let's say a person, for example, is paid by the hour or by the day, he's paid in that sense, so then that last person is responsible. But Bekablonos, but let's say you have a Kablonos, which is where it's a contractor, where they're being paid to do the job, and they're all, again, partners, as we said. So Kulan Chayav, and then they're all responsible. If it didn't fall directly from one of them, the Al Kulan Lishmor, everyone is responsible to watch that the work should be done well, and that it should be placed properly. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Shtei ginos zu al gavzu. Let's say you have two gardens, one on top of the other, v'hayerek bein taim, and then there's a vegetable between them. The question is, who does that belong to? Rabbi Meir Omer Shel Elyon. Rabbi Meir says it belongs to the upper garden, the person who owns that garden. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shel Tachton. Rabbi Yehuda says it belongs to the one of the lower gina, the lower garden. And Rashi explains, Shtei ginos zu al gavzu smuchos zu lazu. What it really means is they're next to one another. Ha'achas karkiyasa gavoa v'she'etzla karkiyasa namach. But one of them is at a higher plane. Essentially, the land, it slants upwards, so you have one person up above and the other person below, and they're next to each other. V'hayerek bein saim, and the vegetables in between, means to say, b'zikifas hagova shezu gavoa mizu yeshumamo b'tzalim. So in the area where it goes up, where it's vertical, so that area there's a little vegetation sticking out. You have over there garlic or onions. And so what's essentially happening is the roots are basically in the earth of the person on top, but it's hanging over the person on the bottom. And so you have a machlokas over here in the Mishnah, and that's again the opinion of Rabbi Meir, is that it's Shel Elyon, and it belongs to the person on the top. Rashi says Shel Elyon, the one on top, Sharei Afaruhu Mishalahu Yonik, because it's in his dirt, and it's taking the nutrients from his dirt. And Shel Tachton, the other opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, is it belongs to the person on the bottom, Sha'al Aviruhu Munach, because it's over his airspace, and that's why it belongs to him. And the Mishnah continues, Amar Rabbi Meir says, Im Yirtze, ha'elyon likach esafaro, ein kan yerek, if the person above would take away all of his dirt, there's no vegetable, so he should get it. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Im Yirtze ha'tachton lamalos haskinaso, but if the person on the bottom wants to fill up his whole garden with dirt, ein kan yerek, you also won't have a vegetable. Amar Rabbi Meir says, Me'achar sheshnein yecholon limchos zeh zeh, since they both can protest with one another, roin mehechon yerek zechait, shouldn't we see where the vegetable is getting its life from? It's getting its sustenance from the earth of the upper one. Amar Rabbi Shimon says, Kol sha'elyon yachol lifshot es yadav v'litol, anything where the person on the top can stick out his hand and take it, harehu shalo, that is his. V'hashar, but anything remaining, shal tachton, that belongs to the person on the bottom. And Rashi explains, Lamalos ginaso offer, if he wants to just fill his garden with dirt, mashva karko le'elyona, meaning he wants to make it equal to the one on top. And Amar Rabbi Meir says, Me'achar sheshnein hen yechol limchos zeh zeh, since they can both protest one against the other, shelo yehi yerek zekan, each one can remove it. Elyon litol afar v'atachton lamalos ginaso, the one on top can take his dirt, the one on the bottom can fill his garden. So rowan mehechan yerek zechai, we have to see where the life force comes from. Mimakom shuyonik, where it gets its sustenance. The god lo yinas, and it should be given to that person. And then the Mishnah said, Kol sha'elyon yachol lifshot yado v'litol harei elu shalo. That was the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. As long as from the area where the person on the top can stretch out his hand and take, that's his. Kidukam Rabbi Meir, hoa me'afaro hi chaya. It's like what Rabbi Meir says. The person above, he has a certain right because it's taking its nutrients from his dirt. V'ashar shel tachton, but everything else belongs to the one on the bottom. Ve'elyon hu gufe afkure mafkir lehu lagabe. The point there is that the one on top, if he can't reach it, he's making it ownerless in terms of the person on the bottom. He's essentially giving it to the person on the bottom. It doesn't look good that it's like a disgrace that he would have to go into someone else's property to get something that is his. So therefore, if he can't reach it, he's essentially giving up on that, and that part will be given to the person on the bottom. That again is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, Bi'ikaro, when it comes to the roots, everybody agrees the roots belong to the person on top. Ki pligi benofo, the argument here is by the branches. Rabbi Meir holds, Shadi nofo basar ikaro, the branches follow the roots. Rabbi Yehuda but Rabbi Yehuda says, we don't say Shadi nofo basar ikaro, that we have the branches follow the roots. Rashi says, B'ikaro sharashe hayarek, again the roots, benofo lifishen teluyan ba'aviro shal tachton, it's because they're hanging over the airspace of the one on the bottom, pligi behu, that's why they argue about that. And the Gemara continues, V'yazal etaymayu, and they follow their reasoning. The Masoras Hashas brings a slightly different girsa. Rashal mochig, the Marshal, erases the girsa that we have, v'hachi goris, and instead has as follows. V'tanya nami gabi mekachu memkar, we have a similar brisa by buying and selling, ki agavna, similar to what we have over here at Tanya. And again, as the Gemara continues here, Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, hayotze min hageza umin hasharash, and that which sprouts from the trunk or from the roots, harei elu shel bal akarka, that belongs to the owner of the land. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, min hageza, if it comes from the trunk, shel bal ho'ilan, that belongs to the owner of the tree. Umin hasharashin, but if it comes from the roots, shel bal hakarka, that belongs to the owner of the land. And we'll take a look at the Mosef Rashi here. Min hageza shel bal ha'ilan. Again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if it comes from the trunk, it belongs to the owner of the tree. The migufi lanos kasi, because it's coming from the tree itself, so the owner of the tree gets that. Umin hasharashim, but if it comes from the roots, shel bal hakarka, then it belongs to the owner of the land. To kaven de mitachas lakarka yotze, since it's coming from under the earth, mikarko gadol, so therefore it's growing from the earth. And the idea over here is like Rabbi Yehuda says here, lo amrinan shadi nofo basari kor. We don't necessarily say the branches follow the main part. So the same thing is true over here. When it's coming min hasharashin, we don't necessarily say that belongs to the Bala Ilan. Instead, that belongs to the Bal HaKarka. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Yud Tes Amud Aleph.